I want those who are old enough to remember the Christmas of 1978. Long way back. I was 15 then, 1978. And for Christmas, my friend Tim, he got the new Elvis Costello album. My friend Greg, he got a new pair of those high-waisted jeans that were very popular at the time. Slight flare. I, on the other hand, got a copy of the Carry On book by Kenneth Eastdale. And this book's very important because it was the first ever book which was a study of the Carry On films. And it was there to celebrate, really, 20 years of the Carry On series, since the first one in 1958, Carry On Sergeant. And I loved the Carry Ons. As a kid, I loved them. I loved the colourful characters, the sort of comic setups. And once I had understood how double entendre worked, I really enjoyed that too. And I thought as a 15-year-old, it was very sophisticated to know about double entendre. It was really good. And so I loved the Carry On films. And this book, which I've still got, is a wonderful book. It was wonderful. And I read it from cover to cover, reread it many times, and I loved it. And even then, though, at the age of 15, I thought to myself, one day I'm going to write a book about the Carry On films. It was a dream. It's now 1989. See, we're moving forward. Okay? We're moving forward. I got my degree in drama, practical drama and filmmaking, actually, in Winchester. And I was in London as a stand-up comedian, and I was also working behind a bar on a paddle steamer on the Thames, and it was called the Tattershall Castle, and it's still there now on the embankment by Charing Cross. And it was a wonderful venue. I enjoyed that very much. And I did comedy nights there every Sunday night, and then went to other gigs around London in the pubs and the clubs of what we call the alternative scene. People talk about woke, but really woke started ages ago in the 70s and 80s with alternative comedy. So we started telling jokes about things other than race and women and mother-in-laws and all the rest of it. So we moved away from that, but I still enjoyed the Carry On films. And I thought at this time, because I had a bit of time, and I thought I'm going to write this book now about the Carry On films. And I thought, well, I don't know where to start. I mean, I'd never written a book before. I've done sort of stand-up material, but I hadn't written a book. So I thought the first thing you do is research. You must interview some of the Carry On actors. It's obvious. But this was 1989, and Sid James had died in 1976. Hattie Jacques died in 78. Kenneth Williams and Charlie Hawtrey died in the same year, the year before, 1988. I was running out of Carry On actors really to interview. So I thought, who should I approach? And I thought, I know, Bernard Bresslaw. I thought, because he always came across as being sort of friendly and kind and a gentle giant sort of person. So I wrote to his agent, and 2 weeks later, I got a reply. This is the reply I received. Dear Mr. Ainsworth, Mr. Bresslaw, not a good start, not Bernard or Bernie, but Mr. Bresslaw does not wish to make any contribution to any book, article, programme, or whatever concerning the Carry On films. He enjoyed their making, but they are long past. And he has done many other things since then. What, you may ask? And they signed off. And I thought to myself, well, if that's the attitude of one of the actors in the Carry On film, what hope have I got? So I gave up. 1999, we're moving on again. And I thought I still wanted to write. I still had this urge to write in me. And I wrote a book called Silly Mid Off, which was published in Tenby by a man who really, well, I don't want to talk about it too much, but it wasn't really well produced. And it's something I don't like talking about at all. And I hope Paul's not going to find a copy of it.
You have a copy somewhere.
And it was quite a comic little novel. I thought, that's quite nice, and that got me thinking. And I thought, no, let's forget about novels. Let's forget about books. I'm going to write a play, and I wrote 2 plays in succession very quickly. And I was teaching by then in Pembrokeshire. I should have said that. And so I had a bit of time spare, summer holidays, and they get paid, during the summer holidays. So I had a bit of time. And I wrote these 2 plays. One was called The Teacher. Good title. Sexy title. Well, they always say, write about what you know. Mistake. And the other play was about Charles Hawtrey, my favourite carry-on star. He was the one, those people who you probably all know, of course, he was one who said, "Oh, hello," And that was the title of the play, "Oh, hello." And I wrote these 2 plays, and one evening we were at a dinner party at one of our posh friends. We don't have many posh friends, but we got a few. We got a few. And we had these posh friends, and they had lots of people we didn't know, lots of couples. And some couples we did know, some couples we didn't. And Sue, my wife, happened to be sat next to Peter Doran, who ran the Torch Theatre in Milford Haven. And we didn't know Peter at all. And Sue, once she found out who he was and what he did, she said, she's very good, you see, she's a very loyal person. She said, "Oh, my husband, Dave, you'd be interested to meet him because he was a stand-up comedian and he's written a couple of plays, you might want to talk to him." So he said, "Oh, interesting." So anyway, we met later on, after the meal, and you're just mingling about. And he said, "Send me anything you've written, Torch Theatre." So I thought, "Oh, this is good. The Teacher is going to be a big success." Not so Charlie Hawtrey. He won't be interested in Charlie Hawtrey because he won't be a carry-on fan. Anyway, I sent them off. 2 weeks later, he phoned me up. He said, "Dave, now about these plays. The Teacher," he said, "let's start with that one." I didn't like it. When I got to know Peter later, he said it was crap. He said it's utter crap. And actually, I read it back, and I threw it in the bin. And this is before you had word processors. You had one copy, and that was it, and that went in the bin. And I'm glad. But he said, "I do like the Charlie Hawtrey one." He said, "But you've only got one problem. Who's going to play the part of Charlie Hawtrey?" And I said, "Pete, what about me?" And he said, "Oh, well, I know you've been a stand-up, Dave, but, have you done acting?" I said, "Well, I did a degree, in practical acting. I was an actor, And he auditioned me. He auditioned me for the part I'd written for myself, really. And
Did you have a say?
And I passed. I passed the audition, though. I passed the audition, and I got the part. And we put the play on. It went to Edinburgh. It toured Wales twice, and it did well. And I got a 4-star review in The Stage. I got a 3-star review in The Scotsman. Who reads The Scotsman? Not interested. But it did really well. And they revived it. And they revived the play in 2015, 2016. And it happened to win a couple of awards. I'm just saying, And it got the carry-on sort of thing going. And I thought, I've got to write, but I need time. Because this time I'm now lecturing at Trinity. I'm lecturing in acting at Trinity. It used to be Trinity College. Now it's the University of Wales, Trinity St David, and the World. And I was teaching up there, and I didn't have any feet up. But then, of course, came COVID in 2020, and I thought, this is it. So I did my research. I went to newspapers. COVID broke out. I met a couple of actors who'd worked with some of the stars. I met the grandson of Kenneth Connor. I had a chat with him, a great guy, and really got on with the book. And this is the book, this is the result. When the Carry-On Stopped. Now, it's got two central bits to it, really, this book, I think. One is to explain the title, When the Carry-On Stopped. It's 1966, when Anglo Amalgamated, who were the production company who made the Carry-On films. They made the first 11. They suddenly, in 1966, dropped it. They said, we're not doing any more Carry-On films. We're fed up. We want to do more upmarket films. And they were picked up by Rank, who were the second biggest. Anglo Amalgamated were the biggest film company at that time. Rank were number 2. And John Davis, who ran Rank, said to Peter Rogers, who made all the Carry-On films, he was the producer. He said, well, I'll take them on, but I won't want to use the Carry-On title because that has been so successful for my competitor. I don't want to use the Carry-On. So I'm going to drop it. Peter Rogers was really annoyed because it was his film, but what could he do? He wanted the films made. So he agreed. But Peter Rogers was a very clever, devious, some would say devious, a clever man with publicity, and he got all the posters made. And the first non-Carry-On film was called Don't Lose Your Head, all about the French Revolution. And Charlie Hawtrey, that's where Charlie Hawtrey's, below the guillotine, and he said, he looks up at the blade and he says, not too much off the top, and it's quite funny. And Charlie Hawtrey did it much better than me. And so it was called Don't Lose Your Head. But in the publicity, it said things like, here's the Carry-On team in Don't Lose Your Head. Let's carry on together. Don't lose your head, etc., etc. And of course, the newspapers and the critics and the reviews all said, don't fool yourself. This is definitely a Carry-On film. So, of course, Peter Rogers was quite happy about this. Next one was called Follow That Camel. And then Peter Rogers was getting a bit fed up by this stage, not using the Carry-On title. So he said to John Davis, I'm going to make one more, and it's going to be called Carry-On Again Nurse, which later got changed to Carry-On Doctor. But by that time, John Davis could see the sense in actually bringing back the titles. So in 1968, when those two films were re-released, because they were so popular, they were called Carry-On, Don't Lose Your Head, and Carry-On, Follow That Camel. So that was the central plank, I suppose, of the book. But the other one was to sort of look at the actors at that period of time. And I sort of concentrated on the year before and the year after 66. So from 65 to 67, the work of the actors, because I wanted to sort of prove the point that these were jobbing actors who, yes, they made the Carry-On films, but they made a lot of other stuff as well. A lot of television, a lot of radio, a lot of pantomime. And of course, the Carry-On, like, as everybody knows, the Carry-On stars weren't paid a lot of money. They were really badly treated financially and had to make their money in other ways, which they did. And as Barbara Windsor always said towards the end of her career, the Carry-On films made me famous, but they didn't make me rich. And it was true of all of them. So I sort of wanted to go into that really. And in detailing sort of 3 years, I could look specifically at the work of the actors in the films. So that's the book. This is it. I've done a small read. I'm going to do one more reading, which illustrates, I think, the difference between the people who made the films and the people who are in them. It's only a paragraph. Won't take me long. Won't take me a minute. If I can find it. There we are. I've got it. So I'm talking about here, just to give it some background, I'm talking about Joan Sims, who was making a TV programme which wasn't successful, called Sam and Janet. It's a bit like The Teacher, not a very good title really. Sam and Janet, which only did one series. Joan Sims had also embarked on yet another television programme called Sam and Janet, playing opposite John Junkin. It was based on a radio series that Joan had done with David Kossoff the year before. The television reboot was not a success though. At least the two stars got on very well, because every morning during recordings, Joan would pick up her co-star John Junkin in her Morris 1100 and drove him to Elstree Studios, where the series was filmed. On the journey, the pair would cheerfully go through their lines. On the subject of cars, it's more than a little illuminating to note which models the various members of the Carry On team were driving in 1967. As a snapshot in time, it is most revealing. Gerald Thomas, he was the director of the Carry On films, Gerald Thomas had an Austin Martin. Peter Rogers, a Rolls Royce. The up-and-coming Jim Dale had a Jaguar E-Type. And Bernard Breslaw was running a Ford Zodiac. Poor old Joan Sims had to make do with a faithful Morris 1100, while Charles Hawtrey had to catch the bus. Oh. That seemed to sum it all up. So there we go. When the Carry On stopped, I could do further readings, but I don't want to bore you. Well, I don't want to give away the interest which is within this noble work. So yes, well, I hope you're interested enough to sort of look at it, read it, maybe buy it. I don't know. But if anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer them.
Peter Rogers was famous for being a miser.
Yes.
But hasn't his estate set up something to try and share some of his...
Yeah.
It's too late for most of them.
It's true. I mean, Peter Rogers died, and when he died, he left a will, and in his will, he left, I think it was 2.5 million, it's in the book, 2.5 million to charity, you're right, people who worked on films. It was mainly for the technicians, actually, and the background actors, but but performers got paid as well, got benefited from it. Very true. But if you're giving that away when you die, it's all a bit late, I think. And it's certainly too late for people like Joan Sims, who really, she ended very poor indeed. It's true she enjoyed life, Joan Sims. Let's not, she had a taste for champagne, but she wrote to Peter Rogers when she was very broke, and she asked him if he could help her out in any way, shape or form, because she was going to lose her house at the time. And he wrote back and said, "No, I'm very sorry, Joan, I won't, because it will set a precedent." Wow. So, and Joan Sims had made over 20 films for Peter Rogers and made a fortune. And that, I think, is the point, that what do we remember about the Carry On films? I think we remember the people in them, because they lifted, let's face it, and Talbot Ruffwell, the writer, will recognise this, they lifted mediocre scripts to a particular height, I think. They did the work, not Peter Rogers. And Peter Rogers always said, oh, well, it's the Carry On name, it's mine, it's my name. But he didn't even come up with the title Carry On Sergeant. He didn't come up with it. Stuart Levy, who ran Anglo Amalgamated, came up with Carry On. So it was all down to him, really, the name. Good question, though.
So where did Peter Rogers get his money financing from in the first place?
Well, he got it from Anglo Amalgamated. They gave him a wad of money and they said, right, you do it. And then he set up a contract. And with the first 5 Carry On films, once they made money, like Carry On Nurse, the second one, made so much money, Peter Rogers said, right, let's do a contract. And of course, the contract was he got a share, they got a share, but of course the actors never got a share. They just got a flat fee, which is very low. Yeah.
Dave, I've always wondered how Kenneth Williams got on with Charles Hawtrey, because they were the two big mainstays of the cast.
Yeah.
But they both had similar styles in the sense that Kenneth Williams was more versatile, I think, in his characters, but they were both quite camp. I wondered how they got on actor-wise in that dynamic, being
They got on okay. They got on okay, but they did have a flash relationship. I mean, both men were very different. I mean, they were both gay, obviously, but whereas Kenneth Williams was very secretive about his sexuality, Charlie Hawtrey was quite the opposite. He was quite flamboyant. So that sort of, I think on set, that sort of clashed on occasion. But they did get on. There's no question they got on. There were moments like the one in the boat, you know, the famous one where in Carry On Jack, where they both had a sort of scene in a boat, and it was Bernard Cribbins was in the boat, and a cow, Kenneth Williams and Charlie Hawtrey, and they're all in this little rowing boat. And Kenny Williams kept complaining that Charlie Hawtrey was pissed and he smelt of booze, you know, and he was really pissed off with Charlie that day. And I think he didn't like his drinking, there's no doubt about that. But they did get on though. I think they respected each other, you know, professionally.
Well, that's good. It's good to know. Thanks.
Do you think if you hadn't at that time had those actors, because as you said, if they're jobbing actors, it was magic because of that combination. If you'd had somebody else as Barbara, character or anything, and that was that then a problem as time went on, because they were irreplaceable. As for me, in my childhood,
I think so.
They were just totally but it was how they all worked together.
Absolutely, because it was a group dynamic. You're absolutely right. It was a group dynamic, and they were a team. And you know, you had to have either Sid James or Kenneth Williams, or preferably both. That Peter Rogers knew that, and then you fitted around the others around that. Joan Sims made a lot of them. Of course, Hattie Jakes was there. Barbara Windsor only made 9. But we sort of remember Barbara Windsor doing the Carry On. That's what she was known for, wasn't it? Whereas what's not known about Barbara Windsor was that she won a Tony nomination, you know, on Broadway, you know, and people don't talk about that. They talk about her in the Carry On films. But you're right. I think once you lose that dynamic, it's like when Charlie Hawtrey walked out on Carry On Cruising, refused to do it. They replaced him with Lance Percival. And no disrespect to Lance Percival, but he wasn't really a carry-on actor, so it didn't really work.
It's literally almost a genre in itself.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the team was important.
It's a very
Julia.
good point what you make about the casting. It's almost like casting a sitcom.
Yeah.
Where the casting has to be crucial.
Yeah.
And although it was a film series, not a sitcom, it almost was a sitcom.
Yeah,
because
yeah, you're right.
Characters
You're right.
through the years.
And people expected it, didn't they? I mean, the audiences went to see the Carry On team.
But John LeMessurier, interestingly, who, as people will know, was married to Hattie Jakes, he never went up for the Carry On films, and although he always respected Hattie for being in them, he said that there was a certain style of actor who could work in a Carry On,
Yeah.
and those who couldn't. And several actors kind of popped up over the years,
Yeah.
especially in the early days, but
And
never made it through.
you're quite right.
Like Bob Monkhouse,
Yeah.
who was being groomed as a
Bob
comedy
Monkhouse
actor.
was a very good example. Leslie Phillips was another one.
Yes.
He's a good example because he knew it wasn't really his thing, really. And also he didn't like the lack of money and knew he could make more money elsewhere. You're right. You're absolutely right.
There's a certain style of actor.
Yeah.
A certain heightened performance.
Yeah.
More subtler comic actors.
Yeah.
Just wouldn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You talk quite a lot in the book about you talk quite a lot about the difference between trained actors and comedians. And
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Frankie Howard, and those times that there was a kind of tension.
Yeah. Lots of tension between
But
Frankie
in
Howard
terms
and the
of
rest of
acting
it.
style,
Yeah.
you might think that comedians would be more suited.
No, because it's a different discipline. And it's quite interesting, really. And I do make that point. You're quite right to mention it, actually, Paul. I'm glad you did. Because Frankie Howard, who made 2 Carry On films, great comedian. I mean, I got loads of respect for Frankie Howerd as a comedian, but as an actor, both Joan Sims and Kenneth Williams were very wary of Frankie Howerd because he wouldn't, you know, in the Carry On films, it was like, it was one take, 2 takes if it really had to be 2 takes. But with Frankie Howerd, he was a little bit, he'd go off piste a bit, and they didn't like that at all. And Joan Sims was wary of Frankie anyway, because she was in a show, I think it was, it's in the book. She was in the show with Frankie, and he upstaged her outrageously, you know, because he did. That's what he did, because he was a comedian. He wasn't an actor. He was not an actor. He was a comedian. So there is that. Whereas someone like Jim Dale, who started off as a stand-up comedian, he slowly got into the rhythm of doing carry-on films, had a great deal of respect for the team, and sort of kept himself to him, you know, kept watching the other actors working around him, learnt from them, and just got better and better and better. And again, another one who, you know, went off to do Barnum in Broadway, and people still say, oh, Jim Dale from the Carry On films, you know.
Do you think the Carry On films will still be popular with the younger generation? And in a way, why are they different to other films and programmes that were about at the time, like On the Buses and things like that?
Yeah, on the buses, yeah. I think, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think it's to do with, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, we were talking about things earlier about comedy. I think it comes in phases. I think that's one thing. But I think young people respect the fact, it was Paul who was saying this, respect the fact that it was a comedy of a period. And as long as you remember that, know it's of that period, you can still enjoy the great comedy performances, I think, within the films. And I think no one's foolish enough to think they are great cinematic films, because they're not. The photography, the editing, some of the sound work is really patchy at times, and you think, oh my goodness. But the performances, I think, still work today, and I think they'll always be successful. I really do. And I keep saying it's amazing that when my publisher picked this up and he gave me an advance and he said, yeah, I want you to do this book, finish the book. I was amazed because I said to him bravely, well, once I got the check, I said, I can't believe, you know, that people need another Carry On book, really. I'm delighted, but I can't really believe it because there were so many Carry On books out there. And I've been to a Carry On convention